Let's speak now with Vedi Hadiz. He's Director and Professor of Asian Studies from the Asia Institute at the University of Melbourne. Professor, thank you so much for joining us, first of all. I'm sure you heard Chatney there, but I do want to make some clarifications, and I think they're going to be important ones. So no, if you like, further discussions in the current Parliament sitting, but does this effectively clear the way for Anies Baswedan, whom we know is a Prabowo rival, to run for the Jakarta governor's post in November? Or can the Prabowo government still somehow try to block his chances?
Okay, 2 points here. One is that it does seem to be logistically and logically impossible for a session of the parliament to take place to revise the law. However, they do still have until Tuesday. And the reason that the protesters in Indonesia are still watching what's happening is that there is a history of high-level connivance amongst the political elites so that they don't trust anything that comes out of the mouth of the leadership of parliament. So basically, they're standing by to make sure that no sneak attempt to hold a session will take place, on Monday or Tuesday. It's highly unlikely, but nobody would put it out of the capacity of the conniving of the Indonesian elites to try something like that. On the second point, it is not just Prabowo who is worried about Anies Baswedan going into the Jakarta gubernatorial election, but it is also Jokowi, because he has tied the longevity of his political influence and of his family to that of the transition to the Prabowo government. He's doing all sorts of things to make sure that members of his family and so on, his entourage, are in key positions. Now, the thing is, the one way that Anies Baswedan could be a candidate is if the Democratic Party of Indonesia, the PDIP, under Megawati Soekarno Putri, appoints him as their candidate. Now, what he is betting on is that Megawati Soekarno Putri will be too annoyed with Anies Baswedan because of the history of the 2017 Jakarta election, where Anies defeated her party's candidate. But really, if Megawati were to swallow her pride, this would be one way, really, to dent, the hegemony that the 10 or 11 parties that have been brought together by the Jokowi-Prabowo alliance and to actually have a semblance of political opposition in Indonesia.
So, Professor, if you were a betting man, which would you say is a more likely situation? Megawati Soekarno Putri swallowing her pride, or doing something else and not nominating Anies, for the post?
I think, well, I'm not a betting man, I'm an analytical man. Just a few hours ago, I think, I don't know how many hours, Megawati was saying, why are people pressuring me to support Anies? What history has he got with our party? Where was he the day before yesterday? Why is he coming to us now? Why is he coming to us now that he needs us? So basically, I think she would swallow her pride only if Anies came to her hands and knees, begging her to support him, and then, of course, to commit himself to the party, because the party has this history of nominating people who are members of the party. So one thing that Anies would need to do would be to register as a member of the party. Now, Anies will need to swallow his pride as well to do that because he's made his name as a political independent.
All right, Professor, the ratification, that was seen to possibly further enhance the political influence of the outgoing president. But Jokowi's son is the VP. He will be the VP soon. And Prabowo Subianto is seen as being installed by him. So really, what do you make of the latest action?
Well, a couple of things, right? The Jokowi-Prabowo alliance is tenuous. As soon as Prabowo becomes president, the influence of Jokowi erodes significantly. All of the patronage networks that he has built potentially could shift to Prabowo's direction. So what he needs to do is install as many people as possible in key positions who are loyal to him to make sure that he has leverage on Prabowo. And another thing that he's been doing, which we haven't mentioned, is to take control of the Golkar party, which is one of the largest parties in Indonesia. It's a party with a very long history. He has succeeded in ousting its chairman and putting in a loyalist as chair. So he's clearly positioning himself so that he does not become redundant, obsolete come October 20th when Prabowo becomes president.
Professor, to an outsider, this all sounds a little bit complex and hard to follow, but my understanding is that protesters, have been following the situation, and this latest, demonstrations and protests is merely a tipping point, and there were earlier events, which made them angry as well. Can you quickly take us through what's been happening in the past few months, if you like, that have made protesters so mad?
Well, I think it goes at least, right, to the Constitutional Court decision that allowed Prabowo's elder son to become the vice presidential candidate, and then he became the victorious vice presidential candidate, which contravened the existing laws at the time. Clearly, that was something that really went against the sort of sense of justice that any person would normally have, given that the head of the Constitutional Court was the brother-in-law of the president, right? So therefore the uncle of Gibran, right? Now, I think that was tolerated, partly because of the popularity of Jokowi himself. He had 75% approval ratings, but now a lot of his actions have become so blatant, blatant in its intention of power grabbing, intention of maintaining his power and influence, that large sections of society that had tolerated his actions before have, I think, lost their patience. Now, we have to actually, sort of moderate also our expectations, I would say. I think that it is entirely possible in Jakarta, in other cities in Indonesia, other parts of Indonesia, for these sorts of spontaneous or semi-spontaneous uprisings, protests to occur, right? But the key thing in terms of returning some semblance of justice, to the workings of Indonesian democracy, and I do say some semblance, is if there was some sort of ability to maintain the sort of momentum that would exert consistent pressure on the political elites so that their behavior wouldn't be so self-serving. And that is what remains missing in Indonesia. We have to see whether this eruption of protests is a one-off, that once, this particular controversy has passed, whether it builds up into something more consistent where some sort of civil society-based sort of monitoring of the elites can take place. But the history of Indonesia recently shows that it's very difficult to maintain these things, partly because the opposition itself is highly fragmented and not very well organized.
All right, Professor, many thanks for your insights. We've been speaking with Vedi Hadiz, Director and Professor of Asian Studies at the Asia Institute at the University of Melbourne.